It's almost the end of the mowing season, which is great news. However, that means leaf season will soon be here, which for some just means even more work. And if that's the case, you'd want a really nice blower to use, but sometimes you have to make do with what you've got instead. And even though it's unfortunate that this blower isn't a shade of orange, it's still better than raking the leaves. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Ryobi leaf blower, and the problem is that I'm told that it won't start. Now for those of you who didn't know, machines like this one needs to be prepared if you intend on not using them for a long period of time. It's either that or use really good fuel that's meant to withstand months of storage in a fuel system. But after looking at the blower, it's pretty obvious that the ignition system might be the problem with this one. Unfortunately, that's not the only problem with it because it looks like bubbles are coming out of the fuel filter instead of the other hose. What this means is that the fuel lines connected to the carb are backwards and needs to be swapped. I'm not sure how long it's been like this, but by how the fuel line looks, someone recently replaced the fuel filter line, probably in an attempt to try and fix the blower. Yes, the engine will start and run if the fuel lines are backwards, but that means unfiltered fuel will flow through the carb, which could eventually clog it. But for right now, we're going to swap the fuel lines, then purge the air from the system and see if the blower will start and run. So unfortunately, it didn't even try and start. Now I have to wonder if we have spark from the ignition system. Now to easily find out, I'm going to install my inline spark checker, which you can find online for several dollars. Simply install it on the plug and then pull the rope. Unfortunately, I didn't see an orange glow from the tester, which means we don't have spark, or it could be very weak as well. So because of the lack of spark and also the damage to the boot for the spark plug, we're going to replace the coil. But before you replace the coil, just make sure you do a lot of testing first, because replacing it is not fun. I'm also going to give this blower a quick spray and rinse to get rid of as much dirt as possible. You obviously don't need to do this, but I find it nicer to work on when it's clean. I would also recommend giving it time to dry off before you work on it. Also, to keep from making a mess, we'll drain the fuel from the tank, and for those asking, the fuel is not stale and there's no water in it either. So here comes the fun part, which is taking out all the fasteners from the blower, that way we can get down to the coil. That's the reason why you need to be certain the coil is the problem, because of the time needed to complete this repair. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time replacing a part that wasn't bad. After taking out all the fasteners, carefully split the housing apart. Next, we need to find a way to keep the engine from rotating while we take off the blower fan. Now because I'm cheap, I'm going to use a long spark plug that I've removed the ground strap and electrode from. I'll then carefully install it into the engine, which will then make contact with the piston, locking it in place. We can then turn the nut and blower fan off the locked crankshaft. I would not use an impact for the blower fan nut, but I'll leave that up to you to choose. After the fan is off the crankshaft, remember to take out the washer and spacer so you don't lose them. Next, we'll take out the 4 bolts that secure the engine to the rear housing. Now these are different fasteners from what you've already taken out, so don't mix them up later on. So you would think that you were done taking apart the blower, however, you still need to take the rest of the plastics apart, that way you can separate the engine. I would recommend keeping the parts you take off organized, which should make it easier to put back on. I'm also taking the handle apart on this one because it'll give us more room to film, but you can choose not to. Just be careful when taking the handle apart because this one was loaded with grease to keep the trigger working smoothly. As you can see, I took the handle apart so we can take the wires out, which means the engine can then be fully separated from the housing. I also disconnected the throttle cable from the trigger, but I don't think I needed to do that. And with the wire and cable disconnected, we can then separate the engine from the housing. So here's our first glimpse of the coil, and to be honest, it looks great, no cracks or any damage to it. But what we can't see is the damage that might be inside it, so we might as well continue with the replacement. All we need to do is remove the 2 bolts that hold the coil to the engine. And with the coil free, we can also see some part numbers on the side of it. Now the number at the top is the part number for the coil, and after doing an online search, you can find these for as little as $15, which isn't terrible. And after comparing both parts, making sure that the new one is the same as the old one, we'll install it. Just make sure the magnets on the flywheel are facing the coil, then place a standard business card over the magnets before placing the coil in place. The business card will set our air gap between the coil and the magnets. Now you can make the gap whatever you want to, but this is how I like to do it. Now what's nice is that the magnet will help to hold the coil to the flywheel. However, do your best to make sure the coil doesn't move away from the flywheel while tightening the bolts. And after carefully removing the business card and making sure the flywheel doesn't make contact with the coil, we'll start to put everything back together. There's no way to say this nicely, but if you thought taking the blower apart was difficult, putting it back together correctly is a lot more difficult and will take even more time. Like I said before, be absolutely certain that the coil is the problem before undertaking this repair. Yes, the coil was affordable, but if this doesn't solve your problem, you'll have wasted perfectly good time on an unneeded repair. And if you think you won't be able to do this repair on your own, take it to the repair shop instead. But be aware that some large repair shops may not take it in unless it's a high quality machine. That's because the cost to repair it could be more than the machine is worth in working condition. And you would be better off buying a new blower if not a good used blower instead. If you hadn't figured it out, there's a lot of detailed work that goes into putting the blower back together. Because if you put it back incorrectly, it may not work the way that it should be. So here's a great example. If you forget to install the spacer and washer, the blower fan could jam against the rear housing and you may not realize it until you finish the repair. And when you go to pull on the rope, that's when you realize the rope is stuck. You'll then have to take the blower apart again and then figure out what went wrong, otherwise it'll happen again. The reason I know this is because it's happened to me before and it can be very frustrating. Once the blower fan's been installed, you can then take out that long spark plug. Now if you don't like the idea of jamming a spark plug against the piston, you can always use rope to do the same thing. But you have to be even more careful with it because it can get stuck. So you'll have to decide which option you're more comfortable with. We are very close to being done. All we need to do is put back all those fasteners, making sure not to apply too much torque and damage the plastic. So this was the spark plug that was installed in this machine when I got it. Now, I'm not a big fan of any aftermarket spark plugs, but if I had to replace it with something that I really liked, I'd have to include it in their bill. And to be perfectly honest, whenever I ask a customer what they want to do, most times they just say don't replace it. And as long as I know there are no issues related to the spark plug, I'm happy to leave it that way. We'll then pour in the fuel that we took out earlier, purge the air from the system, and hopefully this time it'll start and run. And as you just saw, it started right up as it should have, which meant our gamble to replace the coil was correct. Now I'm not sure why the boot on the original one was damaged, but I don't think that was an accident. I also realized that I forgot to turn the choke completely off, but don't worry, on later runs I made sure it was off and the blower ran just fine. So what about the fuel lines then? Well, to be honest, I did end up replacing them, but I did it off camera since this repair was mainly about the coil. Just remember to let the blower cool down so you can do another cold start, otherwise you might have to adjust the carb. So my question is, would you attempt to replace the coil on a blower like this one? Or would you rather take this opportunity to upgrade to a better machine that's probably a shade of orange instead? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.